Hi there and welcome back to Trek Theorist Rewrites. I'm the Theorist and today I'm going to be looking at a different Trek series with you. I mean, sure, I could rewrite pretty much all of TNG Season 1, God only knows some of it needs it, but predominantly I do love TNG, with a few notable exceptions. So instead, I'm going to be heading to an episode that's from a Trek series that is not nearly as well liked by fans. The series finale of Enterprise, these are the Voyages. Now, this one is much more well documented than Code of Honor in terms of hated episodes, and ironically also does tie into a TNG episode, specifically the Season 7 episode The Pegasus, in which Riker's former CO Admiral Pressman comes aboard wishing to restart experiments with a phase cloak. We're then treated to a drama about duty, in which Riker questions whether or not to tell Picard about the occurrences during his earlier mission. In the original version of These Are the Voyages, Riker engages in a holodeck recreation of the NX-01's final mission in order to get more insight. While I love Riker, as my avatar shows, I'm not a fan of how he's used in this episode to turn the Enterprise finale into another episode of TNG. The only redeeming feature is the final sequence where we're treated to beauty shots of the Enterprise D, the 1701, no bloody A, B, C, or D, and finally, the NX-01, as Picard, Kirk, and Archer read the famous monologue. Unfortunately, it didn't redeem the plot, which saw Holo Archer and crew go to rescue Holo Shran's daughter and get Holo Trip killed in the process. Honestly, it's no wonder this was so heavily retconned in the Enterprise relaunch novels. Now, there is one thing I will be keeping. This episode will still tie Enterprise into an earlier series. However, it's going to tie into the series that makes much more sense. TOS. We open with a shot of a high school, with the text on screen revealing we're in Riverside, Iowa, in the May of 2247. We cut inside the building, where a teacher is telling his class full of students to settle down. He informs them that, since they're studying Federation history, he pulled all the strings that he possibly could in order to get them a very special guest speaker. Here to speak to them about the signing of the Federation Charter is one of the original signatories, a man who's served in Starfleet and as Federation President. The camera slowly pans round to reveal the older man as he is introduced. Former Federation President and Captain of the Enterprise NX-01, Jonathan Archer. After the titles, Archer begins discussing his time on Enterprise. He tells the class that he remembers the first time he had to address a school, recalling he'd done it from his captain's chair. One boy, who's noticeably a couple of years younger than the rest of the class, puts his hand up and begins to interject before being shushed by his teacher, who apologises to Archer. The boy is something of a whiz kid, but he's excitable. Archer says it's fine and asks the boy if he has any questions. The boy asks if Archer has seen the new Enterprise yet, the Constitution Class one. Archer replies that he went to a dedication ceremony a couple of years before, but that's not why they're there. The boy asks what being put on trial by the Klingons was like, if one of Archer's missions really inspired the Kobayashi Maru at Starfleet Academy, and if it was hard dealing with a Vulcan first officer. The teacher once again chastises the boy, and once again Archer says it's fine. The trial with the Klingons was one of the most harrowing ordeals of his life. The Kobayashi Maru was indeed based on a mission Archer undertook later in his 10-year on Enterprise, and while T'Pol's habit of citing regulations and logic was a pain in the arse, a comment which gets giggles from the teenage class, she did end up being a major asset to Enterprise and a friend to Archer, one without whom the Federation probably wouldn't have even come to be. The teacher suggests maybe Archer should discuss that last point, the events leading up to the signing of the Federation Charter. Archer hesitates for a moment before smiling wistfully as we zoom into his eye. As we zoom out, we now see Archer as he was in the rest of the show, with on-screen text revealing it's 2161. He's sat on the bridge of Enterprise with Hoshi, now wearing Lieutenant Pips, hurriedly running him through various points for the upcoming conference. Archer tells her not to worry. He won't mispronounce the Andorian delegate's name. Again, she notes. Archer's a fine captain, but he isn't what anyone would call a diplomat or politician. Aside from that one instance at the close of the Terra Prime incident, of course. There's a beeping from Hoshi's console. She moves over to it, picking up her earpiece. They're receiving a distress call coming from a freighter less than 5 light years away. They were attacked by Nausicaan raiders and have been left adrift. Archer orders Travis to set an intercept course. As he does, T'Pol inputs some commands into her console, her eyebrows raising as she sees the information that comes up. She asks Archer if she can speak to him in private. Archer nods, ordering Reed to take the bridge as he and T'Pol enter his ready room. T'Pol waits for the doors to close before explaining she ran the calculations on the course the freighter is drifting on, and by those calculations, it will cross the border into territory annexed by the Romulans during the Romulan War in less than an hour. Enterprise is 3 hours out. If they're to rescue the freighter, they will have to cross the border, and with tensions with the Romulans being as high as they are following the end of the war, there's a chance that doing so could mean that when the new Federation Charter is signed, they will be going straight into a second Romulan war. Archer says he'll take her warning under advisement, but reminds her that this is a key part of their duties. They do have a duty to help those people if they possibly can. T'Pol nods, telling him she'll go and talk to Trip. He's been working on some modifications to the warp drive that might make the difference. Archer nods, gesturing to the door, following her back through to the bridge. As T'Pol enters the turbo lift, Archer asks Hoshi what the freighter is called, and she answers. The SS Kobayashi Maru. In engineering, Trip is running diagnostics on the warp drive. As T'Pol enters, he tells her to let the captain know that the final checks are almost complete and Enterprise will be ready to pull into space dock for her refit upon their arrival at Earth. T'Pol informs him they're taking a detour into the annex system and asks if his modifications are ready. He tells her they are on paper, but they're designed to work in conjunction with the refit Enterprise is due to receive. The warp governor Enterprise is currently fitted with isn't designed to stabilise the kind of warp field that the enhanced warp drive would generate, and there's a good chance that if they use it, Enterprise could tear herself apart. T'Pol informs him that Archer will want to try anyway, to which Trip notes that he could have told her that. He moves to the intercom, asking for the senior staff to meet him in the briefing room immediately. They need to go over the risks involved in this. We cut to the briefing room, where Trip is stood by a display. On it we see an MSD of the NX-01 with what appears to be a secondary hull attached. Yes, we are using the concept art for that NX-01 refit here. Trip notes that the modifications he's been working on are Stage 1 of Enterprise's proposed refit, with what's on screen being Stage 2. The secondary hull replaces the warp governor, allowing the warp field to be stabilised at higher velocities. Without it, Enterprise can still employ the enhanced speed, but there will be extreme risk to the ship. Archer asks what their maximum safe velocity will be. Trip says at warp 5.8 they'll blow out half the EPS grid, and if they go much past warp 6 they'll be at risk of a warp core breach. Even if they weren't, part of the refit is to reinforce the structure of Enterprise, and without it they'll probably shake themselves apart by warp 6.5. Archer asks what kind of speed they'll need to reach the freighter prior to it crossing the border. Trip and T'Pol look between each other for a moment before she answers. In order to be sure they can reach it in time and deploy the grappler, they'll need to hit warp 6.1. Reed asks why they can't try the tractor beam the Andorians gave them shortly after the Coalition formed. Trip says they'll need all the power they can get routed to structural integrity and hull plating. Phlox notes that when the Vulcans initially exceeded warp 6, their radiation containment procedures were lacking, and there were, in cases, severe disfigurement and even quadriplegia caused by exposure to delta rays. Tucker says he read about that, and that's why one of the enhancements he made to the warp core included an enhanced baffle plate, designed to protect against delta rays. Phlox says he'd normally like to inspect the plate himself to make sure it's sufficient containment, but knows that due to the circumstances, that won't be possible. Instead, just to be safe, he'd advise all non-essential personnel be moved as far from engineering as possible. Archer agrees and tells Trip to bring the modifications online immediately. We then cut to an exterior shot of Enterprise, the red Bussard collectors beginning to hum as slowly, their glow begins to take on a more orange hue, the lights in them slowly beginning to swirl. It's almost like we're trying to make it look more like the Constitutions themselves here, but of course we never do that. Anyway, we zoom into the bridge dome, entering the bridge in the same manner as seen in The Cage. On the bridge, Archer takes his seat, telling Hoshi to bring internal comms online. He tells the crew they're about to break all their previous warp speed records and requests all non-essential personnel report to their quarters immediately. As the line cuts, he tells Travis to prepare to increase speed to warp 6. Travis responds in the affirmative, a nervous excitement in his voice. Enterprise begins to accelerate rapidly. As she does, we cut to engineering. A coupler beside the warp core sparks, catching fire. Trip orders someone to put that fire out as he has to regulate the matter-antimatter reaction manually at these speeds, unless they want the ship to suffer a warp core breach. He presses the communications console, yelling that Travis had better ease up on that throttle unless he wants them all to blow. We cut back to the bridge, where Archer tells Trip they don't have a choice if they want to rescue the Kobayashi Maru. We then cut back to the classroom. The boy from before excitedly exclaims that this is the mission that led to the creation of the Kobayashi Maru. The older Archer pauses, asking the boy how he even knows about that test. The boy explains that his father and his brother Sam both took the test, and they both failed. He did some reading and found that no one passes the Kobayashi Maru test, and he wants to be the first. There's 2 years until he can enter Starfleet Academy, and then another 2 before he gets to take the Kobayashi Maru, meaning he has 4 years to figure out how to do it. Archer notes that he'd better listen closely then, unless he wants to make the same mistakes that Archer did. We cut back to Enterprise, where the younger Archer sits on the edge of his seat. On the view screen we see a star chart showing Enterprise's relative position in regards to both the Kobayashi Maru and the line when they enter Romulan territory. The Kobayashi Maru is drifting quickly, but Enterprise is moving faster, gaining speed. Reed reports that hull plating is down to 7%. If they keep redlining the engines like this, it will give out. Archer asks Travis how long until they intercept, and he responds less than a minute. Archer asks if the hull plating will hold for that long, and Reed responds that there are no guarantees. Enterprise just wasn't designed for this. Archer presses the comm button, asking Trip if he can spare any power for the hull plating. Trip tells him he's giving Archer everything he can spare. As he does, another relay blows and another fire breaks out. As Trip gives the order for someone to put out the blaze, the console in front of him blows, sending him flying backwards over the railing. Enterprise drops out of warp, plasma streaking from her nacelles, less than 1 kilometre in front of the Kobayashi Maru. Archer orders Hoshi to hail them and inform them that Enterprise is there to help. As he does, she reports that they are being hailed, and it's the Romulans. Archer asks if they'll actually go on the viewer this time, knowing from the 5 years of the war that they won't. The Romulans never let Starfleet see their faces, they are that xenophobic. Archer informs the Romulan commander that Enterprise is engaged in emergency rescue operations and orders them to remain on their side of the border. The Romulan commander agrees she will, before noting that due to Archer's lack of time taken to calculate Enterprise's trajectory, Enterprise is on the Romulan side of the border. Archer stands there for a moment, a stunned look on his face. He turns to the Pole, who nods, confirming the Romulan is telling the truth. The Romulan orders Archer surrender and informs him that Enterprise and her crew will be taken to Romulus, there to stand trial and face execution for their crimes against the Empire, with Enterprise herself to serve as a monument to the soon-to-be-formed Federation's failure. To prove that Archer has no choice, her own warbird and 2 others decloak in front of Enterprise. Archer signals for Hoshi to cut the line. He presses the comm button on his chair, asking Trip if he can get them back to warp as soon as the evacuation's complete. Trip's second-in-command answers, informing Archer that Trip was knocked off the gangway. The fire in engineering had spread, and they had to evacuate, leaving the injured and apparently unconscious Trip inside. We cut across the shocked expressions of the bridge crew, lingering on Archer and T'Pol. Archer tells the engineer to begin work on evacuating all personnel from the area. They're abandoning Enterprise. Archer orders the Romulans be hailed again. He informs the Romulan commander that he'll be damned if he lets them take his ship and crew. He's ordered an auto-destruct, and in 1 minute Enterprise will be nothing but ash and dust. The Romulan scoffs that Archer would sooner kill himself and his crew than be taken prisoner, to which Archer says no. He'd just sooner kill himself and his crew than be her prisoner. He then tells Reed to lock phase cannons and photon torpedoes on the foremost ship. They're going down fighting. He orders Travis to execute evasive pattern Archer 4, with Enterprise beginning to move, coming about and moving below the warbird. We then cut to engineering. The flames are licking at the once pristine room, the warp core herself groaning as alarms blare out. In the middle of the blaze, Trip struggles to pick himself up. He's badly burned from the console explosion, and as he struggles to his feet, he winces as he attempts to put his weight on his broken left leg. He slowly limps over to the secondary console for the warp core. It's already begun reaching lethal levels of radiation. He grimaces as he begins work on the controls, beginning by cutting oxygen flow into engineering. On the bridge, the crew are in the midst of battle. They're outmanned and outgunned. Enterprise shakes violently, and Reed reports that hull plating is gone. We cut to outside the ship where a plasma torpedo strikes the left side of the saucer section, ripping a hole in the ship. We cut back to the bridge where Archer asks if the evacuation is underway, to which Hoshi says the routes to the escape pods have been cut off. There's no escape for anyone now. Suddenly, Travis tells Archer engine power is showing green across the board. They can go to warp. Archer takes a moment, noting the corner of the view screen where the Kobayashi Maru can be seen. He grimaces as he declares they can't save those people and orders Travis to get them out of there, maximum warp. Enterprise comes about, jumping to warp. T'Pol reports the Romulans are pursuing, before saying there's something on long-range sensors. Archer orders it be put on screen. We see a fleet consisting of multiple Vulcan, Andorian, Tellarite and Earth ships, Columbia at the front of them. Hoshi reports they're putting out a hail on all frequencies. Captain Erica Hernandez comes up on screen from the bridge of Columbia, ordering the Romulans to return to their space. Failure to do so will be treated as a declaration of war. There's a heavy pause. Finally, Reed reports the Romulans are breaking off their pursuit. Archer breathes a sigh of relief before a comm comes through. It's Trip's number 1. He tells Archer that he might want to get down to decon. Archer darts from his chair to the turbo lift, not waiting for anyone to follow before ordering it to take him down to decon. When he reaches the exterior of the chamber, he finds Phlox waiting, a somber look on the doctor's face. He tells Archer there's nothing that can be done. The patient has 3rd and 4th degree burns all across his body and was exposed to massive radiation before suffering oxygen deprivation, putting the fire out. Archer looks at the display to see the heavily injured Trip Tucker. From inside decon, Trip asks if they managed to save the freighter crew. Archer shakes his head, informing Trip there was nothing they could do, before noting that it was Trip who saved them all from the Romulans. Trip half smiles, noting that he won't be doing that again in a hurry. Archer tells him to save his strength, that the best doctors available will treat him and he'll be right as rain. Trip tells him they both know that's not true, with his final words being, "Tell T'Pol it's okay. I'm going to see Elizabeth." As he trails off, Archer collapses to the floor, sobbing at the loss of his friend. Behind him, the door opens to T'Pol entering the room, looking between the display of Trip's body and the grieving captain. The scene is silent as she runs over, taking Archer in her arms and attempting to comfort him, as tears begin to roll down her own face. We cut to the armory, where we see a hollowed-out torpedo ready to be loaded into the tube. Archer stands at the front, flanked by T'Pol on his right and an empty space on his left. He informs the gathered crew they're there to pay their respects to their honoured dead. Trip Tucker was a fine officer, a great engineer, and a colossal pain in the arse. More than that, he was Archer's best friend, and he will miss him. Archer notes he remembers the first time he met Trip, and the time he helped him and A.G. Robinson steal the NX Beta. Trip helped make everything they'd done, everything leading to the Federation Charter that was about to be signed, possible. Now, he'd given his life to make sure they'd all be there to see it. Amazing Grace rings out as the torpedo is loaded into the tube and fired off into space. We then cut to the signing ceremony with on-screen text revealing it's a week later. The scene plays out basically the same as the episode proper, with this being one of the only ones that really didn't need fixing. Honestly, the interaction between T'Pol and Archer here was absolutely beautiful. Our final shot of Archer as we see him in the rest of the show is as he walks out onto the stage to thunderous applause, opening his mouth to speak as we zoom into his eye and zoom back out on the older Archer in the classroom. Archer tells the class that history isn't just about the events. It isn't just about the facts. It's about the people who make it. Trip Tucker embodied everything that is great about the Federation, and in Archer's eyes, it should be him sat in front of them, not Archer. He then looks at the boy who's been asking the questions and tells him that one of the main lessons that he learned while he was in command of Enterprise, one of the main things that Trip Tucker taught him, was that risk is part of the game. He sits there, his eyes filled with emotion at the thought of his lost friend. He swallows hard and composes himself, before asking the boy what his name is. "My name is James T. Kirk," the boy says, "and I want to be captain of the Enterprise one day." The class laugh at the young Kirk. This isn't the first time they've heard that. Archer hushes them, slowly standing and walking over to the boy and clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Well, who am I to argue with the captain of the Enterprise?" We then cut to a shot of Earth from space, panning around to see the NX-01 as Archer begins narrating space, the final frontier. The NX-01 flies past as the pre-refit 1701 comes into view. James T. Kirk continuing, "These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise." The 1701 flies by and the Enterprise A comes into view as Kirk continues, "Her continuing mission." The Enterprise A leaving view as the Enterprise B comes into sight. Captain Harriman finishing the sentence, "To explore strange new worlds." The Enterprise B flies by and is replaced with our very first shot of a pristine Enterprise C. Captain Rachel Garrett continuing, "To seek out new life and new civilizations." Before the Enterprise C flies off, the Enterprise D coming into view as Captain Jean-Luc Picard concludes, "To boldly go where no one has gone before." The Enterprise D flies off screen as finally the Enterprise E comes into view, doing a flyby before jumping to warp on her next adventure. And that is my rewrite of These Are the Voyages. I'll admit originally Trip was going to survive. However, it occurred to me that it actually makes a very fitting send-off for the character to let him go this way, saving everyone, and not doing a job that, frankly, a couple of security officers could have done. Not only that, but it adds so much emotional weight and resonance to the rest of the story, it makes it a fitting series finale. I also did want to keep this a love letter, but make it a love letter to the whole franchise. So, instead of making it another episode of TNG like it was before, it's very much an Enterprise episode, continuing the final season's trend of showing the origins of things we're used to in Trek and giving us an in-universe meeting between James T. Kirk and Jonathan Archer. I also felt very strongly that we should have had all the Enterprises we've seen on screen, not just the hero ships. I did make an exception for the Enterprise J because honestly, we know nothing about her or her captain. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this rewrite. I know I did. If you did, please like, comment, share and subscribe. It's a small click or type of a message for you, but it means a lot to me and it honestly shows me where I'm going right and where I'm going wrong. So, until next time, this is the Trek Theorist, and I'll see you out there. Theorist to Enterprise. 1 to beam up.